Welcome to Creativity Calling, where we bring you informal interviews with exceptionally creative people. Creativity Calling is a service of Songwriting with Soldiers. With today's Creativity Call, here's Songwriting with Soldiers co-founder, Mary Judd.
It is 7 o'clock on October 15th, 2018, and we are on the phone for our Creativity Calling interview with Michael O'Brien, who is a very fabulous person, fantastic photographer who has taken photographs of people we'll let Michael tell us some of the notables that he has been fortunate to spend time with, and for how long he has been in this field, and all sorts of other details. We'll hear from him, and we're very honored to get to have Michael work with us with Songwriting with Soldiers, and he's attended 4 retreats. Michael, is that right? Maybe 5, 6?
4 or 5, maybe even 5.
Yeah, throughout the years, and he was at our first and our most recent, coincidentally, spanning 6 years. So, without further ado, we'll dive in.
Congratulations to Songwriting with Soldiers.
Yes, thank you. We're 6 years. We're just a little older than Olive Spohr. A whole lifetime.
Wow.
Yeah.
May you grow to be 60 years.
Absolutely. So, Michael, we want to talk to you. We're going to save a few questions at the end specifically about your work with Songwriting with Soldiers. But we will start with one of the themes of Songwriting with Soldiers is building creativity. We're firm believers that the power of creativity, when we acknowledge it in all of ourselves and each other, that it helps us broaden our ideas of what's possible in the world in so many ways. And you are an icon of creativity in our eyes. We would like to hear what you think creativity means, and what does it mean to you to be a creative person?
I'd have to step back because I almost jumped to the question about how did you get started.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of an accident because when I was in high school, all of my friends / creative friends were musicians, and they went on to become, some of them quite well known, notably in a band called Big Star. But in high school, we were all friends and hanging out. And due to my friendship, if I had any musical talent, I could have been in some wonderful bands, high school and beyond.
Where were you in high school?
I tried everything. In Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay.
And this is back in, 65 to 68, 1965 to 1968. And so I tried everything. I tried the guitar, the bass, the drums, nothing. It just didn't work. So they went on to form a band, and they were getting more and more acclaim, and I was nothing but just a hanger-on until I got a camera, and I started sort of a parallel journey. And then we rejoined again when they needed pictures because they became well known, and I was the only photographer they knew. And I had by that time, by the high school year, one of the band members, we set up a little dark room in my grandmother's basement. And it was this damp, dark basement in Memphis, Tennessee, 1967. But we had all the plumbing that we needed, and we had the darkness. There were no windows. So we set up in a larger, and we developed the film. We put the negative in the enlarger, exposed the piece of paper, and put the piece of paper in the Deckdoll paper developer underneath the glow of an orange safe light. And when I saw the picture start coming up slowly in the developer under the orange glow of the safe light, I was hooked. It was magical. And that moment just bore a hole in me and stuck with me forever. And so, it was by accident. It was sort of like being blocked on the musical end. The creativity came out another hole.
Yeah.
It's like
Ah, that's such a good way to put it.
And yeah, and so it was there. Just it couldn't. I couldn't express it musically, but the camera was. As soon as I grabbed hold of the camera, it was life changing and really magical. And what happened, just in terms of my personality, I was shy, introverted, quiet, hanging out with more of the artistic friends, so out of the mainstream and the fringe.
Mm-hmm.
And the camera gave me a way to connect to the world. And what I've always loved to do is to photograph people. And the camera's been my passport and my license to do that.
Wow. What is it you like about photographing people?
Well, I guess, I guess one thing, I love connecting with people, and it's a very safe way to connect and interact. And as I've gone on and made my living being a photographer, it's being a storyteller, looking at other people's lives and telling their story, or telling something about them in terms of a picture.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really using a camera to say, look at this. Isn't this incredible? Whether it's a school teacher standing out in the field in West Texas, or it's Willie Nelson or a celebrity. It's the same thing. It's a human being, and they've been endlessly fascinating for me. And
Mm-hmm.
I've never been drawn to do still lifes or landscapes. The camera's always been sort of one thing for me, to photograph people and events, and hopefully an artistic way, but also in a documentarian way.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to two things that you brought up there in just a minute. But so you talked about the spark that bore a hole through you, seeing your photo develop, coming to life under that orange glow. What was your first paid gig when you became, okay, I'm a professional photographer now?
Well, I went off to college and I was a philosophy major, liberal arts. I went to the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. So it's 400 miles east of my home in Memphis. And remember, I had the little darkroom in my grandmother's space, and I continued to take pictures, and it was not digital then. It was all film. So we would put a roll of Tri-X film, Kodak Tri-X film, black and white film, in the camera. And I kept shooting while I was in college, but I didn't have any place to develop my pictures. So I got this idea of going to the school newspaper and seeing if I could use their darkroom and also work for them to doing photography for the school newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a darkroom with 6 guys working, and so they put me on, and it was Knoxville, Tennessee, 1969, and every picture you got published, you got $4.
Oh, wow.
So, and if I had a good month, I got 25 pictures in the paper.
Mm.
So that was $100. And let me tell you, 1969, $100 in 1 month in Knoxville was a lot of money.
Mm. Wow. Yeah.
So I never studied photography in college. I've never taken a course in photography.
Wow.
But the guys in the paper, we taught one another.
Yeah.
About the fine art of developing negatives and printing pictures, and so that was my first the way I got started. Then there's what is the old Life magazine photographer, Philip Paulsman, said, photography is like prostitution. First you do it for fun, and you do it for friends, and then you do it for money.
Well, it sounded like a lot of yours kind of braided together pretty quickly. It's interesting. I didn't realize that you hadn't studied it, and I think for our listeners that's helpful to hear, that so just a question for you about that. Did you just feel, I want to do this regardless and I'm going for it? So confidence wasn't really even a question. Confidence about your capability.
I was in love with it and passionate about it. And also, the paper, the school newspaper, was a vehicle that if people, my friends and other students would see the pictures in the paper, and if they liked it, they would say something to me. So I started getting, good feedback and validation. The world clapped and I kept doing it.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, you went from that in college, and then what happened?
Well, I graduated with a philosophy degree. So really the only thing is would have been to continue on and to become maybe a philosophy, do further study in philosophy. But I knew by the time I graduated that I wanted to get a job at a newspaper, a metropolitan newspaper, and it was the recession in the early 70s. None of the papers were hiring, and so I did just stayed in Knoxville, did freelance work until I got a job in Miami, Florida, and I was hired to mix the chemicals for the other 6 photographers who were staff photographers on the paper. And so that was and I had built up a portfolio of pictures in college working for the paper, a good one. And so Miami hired me, and it was the greatest 6 years of my life, 7 years of my life, being a photographer for the afternoon newspaper in Miami, Florida. Mm. And the wonderful thing about that, what I really loved, were the people that worked on the newspaper. Because this was before Watergate, Woodward, and Bernstein. So most of the writers, or reporters, other photographers did not have formal educations in journalism. They were self-taught, and it was a sort of a tradesman. And I loved how down to earth and real they were. And that was became the education of a newspaper photographer, which was phenomenal training because you had to do 3 or 4 jobs every day. You had to be quick. You had to be resourceful. You had to be strategic, creative, and figure out how to compete with the other newspaper and other photographers. But I loved it, and in those, I think I learned more in those 6 or 7 years than I've learned ever since. My boss was an ex-Marine.
Oh, wow.
Who never went to college. But just Charlie Trainer, who is an amazing man, a great teacher, a wonderful boss, very human, and a phenomenal photographer. So I was lucky. Yeah.
So that's an interesting tie-in here. So he was an ex-Marine. Was he a photographer for the Marines, or did he pick photography up?
I don't.
Just a quick side question.
I think that's a good question. I'm not sure the answer, but I don't believe he was a photographer in the Marines. But
because we have some combat photographers in our community, so yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. And of course, the combat photographers are some of the most amazing human beings in the world when you think about it. But I think I don't think Charlie was a combat photographer. I mean, I don't think he was a photographer of Marines, but he was a very two sides of Charlie. He was very tough internally, but very gentle on the outside. So, and a great boss to have coming out of college and coming into work for the newspaper.
Yeah. So you, along with newspaper work, and I know we could have like probably a 4-day interview here with you, and hopefully we can have more in the future. For now, I know like you've done the newspaper work, and then you have put out several books of your own. Well, been involved in different photography books and projects and pieces for publications like Life magazine, National Geographic. There's so much I want to ask you and other people do. One highlight question that comes up a lot from people, what they want to hear you talk about is, when you have been someone who has been in such an intimate situation where you're photographing people like Willie Nelson or George W. Bush, the Destiny's Child, Beyonce, when they were starting out, Troy Aikman, Earl Campbell, not Jimmy Buffett, the other Buffett, and not your dog, Warren Buffett. So what pops out to you, Michael? What would you tell people that have been, if you had to say, okay, let me tell you a real highlight experience of my career so far? We have no idea what that would be. So show us one or two.
Wow, that's there. That is very.
We know you probably have 50. What pops in your head? We know it's probably not the one because there's so many. But what are one or two you can tell us about?
Well, first I'm going to answer the question, but I got into doing the portraits, like you mentioned, the different people, Willie and George W. Bush and ZZ Top, Destiny's Child, etc. That became, it sort of was the second half of the career, but the first half of my career working for the newspaper, and then after 6 years I left and began freelancing for Life magazine, and I moved to New York. I did black and white picture stories. So a black and white picture story is a set of pictures that provides a narrative and tells a story. So the first assignment I did for Life, and Life came back as a monthly magazine in 1978 after season publication in 72, I was assigned to do a story on the New York hospital burn ward. And I spent a month photographing what happens on the burn unit of New York Hospital and focusing on one particular nurse, Charlotte Sheehan.
Thanks for listening to part 1 of our interview with Michael O'Brien. You've been listening to Creativity Calling, a service of Songwriting with Soldiers. Executive Director Kristen Starling, co-founders Mary Judd and Darden Smith. Our mission statement: we transform lives by using collaborative songwriting to expand creativity, connections, and strengths. Learn more at songwritingwithsoldiers.org.